So, hello and welcome then to our first, podcast on behaviour. I suppose I'll explain a little bit about where this comes from, really, because I kind of felt like there's knowledge and experience I want to share with people. I want to bring other people in to share ideas on how we can tackle behaviour in schools, because it's still an issue, it's still a problem post kind of COVID, and lots of schools are struggling with it. And there seems to be this market out there for people who want help and advice. And there's also a lot of people with lots of good advice. And if you read lots of books on behaviour, there seems to be loads of stuff in terms of management, leadership, but actually no real down-to-earth sort of day-to-day issues or solutions. So what I'm hoping to provide is, over the next year, maybe, we'll see how we go, is like a weekly podcast or just a chat saying what you can do, aiming to keep them quite short, really, keep them down to sort of 15 minutes, about what you can do as a teacher with ideas and strategies. And there will be some leadership stuff in there because there is some really good stuff out there that will help people. So what I really want to focus on today is looking at the role of the tutor as from a starting point of behaviour. We'll talk about a classroom teacher as well in the future episodes. And I'd like to get other people in, other colleagues in, other people from online who might want to talk about being in certain roles like heads of year, or senior leaders in charge of behaviour and what it means to them and how they can support colleagues. But really, today's focus was just talking. I've done some training recently on the role of the tutor, and I think it's something that we just don't focus on enough anymore. And certainly going back 20 years ago when I started teaching, the role of the form tutor was just like, it was one of those things that you just had to get right, and you had to grow and develop and realise kind of how important and integral that role is to students. You know, I know as an adult, I look back and I remember all of the tutors that I had going through school, the good and the bad ones. And the best ones, the ones that cared and took notice of everything that I did. And that's really where I'm going to start from, is like, the role of the tutor is, I think, possibly the biggest, most important role in a school. And it's often undermined or kind of not really flagged up as, I don't want to say undermined actually, it's often not kind of given the kind of respect that it's due, because a good tutor can make or break either a tutor group or even individuals as well. For students, it can turn students around, and lots of people will see the role in different ways. Some people see it as a bit of a chore, and that's often, unfortunately, the view for some people is an inconvenience. And I particularly have seen it with heads of department in some schools that are like, I'm a head of department, I shouldn't be a form tutor, I haven't got time for that. And I get it, I understand it. Form tutor is a very intensive role, but it's one that has to be done right. And sometimes heads of departments are very, very busy because they've got a lot to do. But you can't neglect that role as a form tutor. It's pivotal to those students being successful in school, from everything from just general behaviour management through to academic support. So I'm going to go through a couple of things, talk about the importance of the role of the tutor, how you can be a good tutor, the certain things you can do, and it might give some people some advice and some tips on things to do. So the main difference is there are obviously different types of tutors in terms of different key stages. So whether you're a key stage 3, 4 or 5, you can have different things to do. So as a key stage 3 tutor, I'm talking about secondary schools mainly here, you are going to be the first person that might welcome someone into that school when they can join in year 7. And so the role there really is to form that link and to be someone that they can ask lots of questions to. You've got to be, easy to approach. I don't believe in that whole kind of being miserable till Christmas type thing. That is a very old school kind of way of dealing with behaviour. It doesn't really work. You can be warm and strict. You can show them that compassion and fairness. And I think that's where sometimes people go wrong on behaviour, is that they think you have to be mean and horrible. And if you are nice to kids, they're just going to walk all over you. And it's like, no, actually, you can show them that love, care and attention. And this is the one thing I want to really point out about behaviour, and where people go wrong, is that they think behaviour is all about just telling people off, and that, or having really strict rules, will get children to behave. It's the biggest lie in behaviour. The one thing that will get students to behave is love, care and attention. That's it. End of story. If you care and you love and you work hard for those students, they will do anything for you. Because ultimately, that phrase, and it's the best phrase in the book, to be honest, is I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. Is the most powerful phrase you can say to someone. Because what you're saying is, I care about you so much, but actually you've upset me. And if a student knows that you care, that is far more powerful than any sanction or punishment. I genuinely believe that you could do away with all punishments if you can get to a point where everyone shows enough care and attention. But we're not there yet. And I think, unfortunately, there are sometimes people in teaching who just don't care enough. In all kind of jobs, there'll be some people who just do it for the money. You can't be in it for the money. You cannot be in teaching for the money. It just doesn't work. So when it comes back to being a good form tutor, and being that first point of call, really, that is the bread and butter of the job. And so particularly if you're a year 7 tutor, part of a new transition intake, you are pivotal to that student starting school. They are the first you are the first impression that they are going to get of the school, the environment, how they're going to be cared for. You're going to be the one who's going to put them at ease in terms of, well, they worried about things like bullying and how they're going to fit in, where they're going to know the way around school. So that's integral to the role. If you're looking at Key Stage 4, or even at the end of Key Stage 3, if you're going to do, depending on certain schools will do options at different times, we won't even get into that. But if you're going to do Key Stage 3 options and stuff, then you're going to be incredibly important in terms of what students are going to pick and having conversation with them. You should be anyway. Some tutors have nothing to do with it, which I think is wrong. Ultimately, you're there as a guide and support. You should know these students well enough to say, hey, look, you're really good at that. Get a mixture of different subjects. Don't just do the ones that you're good at, but you need to do the ones that are going to be important to your career choices and where you want to go. So that's the Key Stage 4 role. Key Stage 5, again, is completely different. I'll be honest, I haven't had as much experience with Key Stage 5, but whether it's helping supporting with UCAS forms or looking at apprenticeships and guiding students on where to go to get information about what they want to do in the next steps, that's going to be incredibly important as well. And again, knowing those students and knowing them well enough since when they've joined you, depending on whether you're a school that follows students through each year group. Most schools tend to have separate from the Key Stage 3 and 4 to the Key Stage 5. But again, that's a really important role. So the similarities, though, let's just be really clear about the things that are the same. Attendance, looking at behaviour, support with them in terms of the pastoral issues, whether it's safeguarding, things like that, tracking progress and attainment. Those are the things that run throughout all key stages. And so as a tutor, you need to be aware of them. You need to know how your students are doing. I know when I was a form tutor, one of the things I always took pride of was the fact that if anyone got into trouble or was any behaviour issues, I got involved. I wanted to know what's going on. I wanted to keep a track on those students. There's a reason why that old phrase loco parentis was used in terms of being describing a teacher as their parent, away from home, because you are effectively the parent. And the way I look at it now, and it's certainly, I never really looked at it before when I was a form tutor, I just did what was right because I thought it was right. But now as a parent, I see it differently. I want to know that when I send my son to school, he's been treated the way I would treat him at home. I want that teacher to be his parent. I want them to care about him as much as I do. And that's an expectation. I think it should be an expectation of all teachers. So when we talk about the role of the form tutor, they've got to come from this position of caring. Now, if you want to go back to basics of whatever a teacher is told when they go through their training in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you look at that, it's really evident, it's really clear that actually, in order for us to make sure that we get the best out of students and they can get to the top of that pyramid, they've got to have all the basics in the bottom. They've got to have that care, safety, and sense of belonging, love, build up their self-esteem so we can get to that pinnacle point where they're creative and they're problem solving. We can't do that unless they've got the basics. So starting off point then, like I said, some tutors, some teachers can find it really difficult because they don't want to be a form tutor, but if you're going to be, you've got to do it right. One of the things I'll refer to is Simon Sinek in terms of his beginning with why, and we use that in terms of training. We look at that in terms of supporting teachers and knowing, understanding your why. If you understand where you're coming from, you can basically see where you're going to go. And so as a form tutor, you've got to understand your why you're there. And if you're not there for the right reasons, it will scream out and the students will know it. They will feel it. So you've got to understand your why. And I would suggest your why has to be coming from a position of care, love and attention. You want to support those students. You want them to do the best that they can because you care about them and want the best for them. So that's your starting point. So when you're talking about being the best tutor, before you even do anything else, you've got to come from a position of caring. You've got to come from a position of modelling the behaviour that you expect to see from the students. So be on time. Don't be late. Okay? If you're late to your tutor group, if you promise them things and don't do it, all you're screwing to them is saying, I don't care about you. I don't love you enough from a professional point of view. And therefore, I'm not putting in that effort. As a form tutor, you have to model that behaviour. That's your first thing. So know your why, model the behaviour you expect to see. From there, you're going to build up to all the other things in terms of being that consistency. The consistency, when we talk about behaviour, is the number one enemy of behaviour across any school. Consistency. Without consistency, you are going to have problems. And by consistency, what I mean is you can't be a maverick. You can't be someone who does things differently to the tutor next door to you. You can't be letting stuff slide. You can't be ignoring uniform, letting students wander in and out. Number one pet hate I can't stand is, allowing students to sit on desks. Whatever your rules are in the school, you just got to make sure you're consistent with them. Different schools have different rules, whether it's like you accept black trainers, all that sort of stuff. Okay, school rules. You can't change those, but as a form tutor, you've got to abide by those rules, and you've got to stick to them, and you've got to enforce them. Now, obviously, we'll talk about leadership at another time in terms of whether senior leaders then support those form tutors to establish those things, because there's nothing worse. A form tutor can only be as good as the senior leadership and the head teacher. If your head teacher is not going to back you on those things, so if I've had it before in previous schools where I've worked, where I've had students kick off and complain, form tutors, because I was really clear on expectations around uniform and equipment, and that student then complained, and all that happened was, unfortunately, one of the senior leaders in that school chose to then just move them tutor groups so they could just get away with not wearing the correct uniform every day. And for me, that just undermined me as a form tutor. It wasn't because I was trying to do anything wrong. I was trying to follow the rules. But if you're following the rules that the school has set and then you're not backed, it's just pointless. So everything's got to, every consistency at all levels, I suppose, is what we describe as. But being as a form tutor, you've got to know the rules. You've got to understand them all. You've got to understand how to stick to them from a consistency point of view. And then you've got to make sure they happen and follow them up. And you've got to understand that in order for the behaviour to be good in a school, to be outstanding in a school, it starts at the bottom level with tutors being consistent. And also them understanding that they have to take that role of calling home and get involved. Too many times I've seen in schools where, people think it's the pastoral team's job to deal with behaviour. It's not. It is not the pastoral team to deal with behaviour. They are there to support behaviour. If you look at the teacher standards, it's really clear. Every person in the school, particularly teachers, are expected to deal with behaviour, are expected to follow up on it. And if you've got more people dealing with stuff, you've got more people being consistent, behaviour will get better. The example I use is, a child walks down a corridor, and if every single person, every adult they bump into tells them to tuck in their shirt, by the end of that corridor, they will just leave their shirt tucked in because they know they're going to get challenged. You don't need to have sanctions for every single type of behaviour. There do need to be sanctions. But the point is, if you're consistent and if everybody follows the rules, behaviour gets better and gets easier for everybody else. But it starts with the form tutor following up on those things. It then needs the backing of senior leaders and middle leaders as well. So uniform, checking on lates as well, tackling lates. And I know something I always found difficult when I was a teacher, but we didn't have all the data back then. It was back in the early days, 20 years ago. Systems weren't as good as they are now. You couldn't go online to look at Sims or Class Charts or whatever system you have and look at data so readily available. So we've got all of those, beginning with the why, knowing where you're coming from. You've got all the consistency. We've got the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then we're modelling the behaviour we expect to see. But then we're talking now about the next level, which is about making sure all those things are consistent before we even get to the point as a form tutor that you have to then support students and make sure you provide them with things to do. And I think one of the key things around the role of the tutor is having good support from head of year and from your senior leaders about a good tutor programme. So if you've got time in the morning, there needs to be a mixture of activities to do with students where you can work with them together to find out stuff about them, but also activities that you can allow them to do so you can then spend more time with individuals and find out things about them. So those are some of the basics around being a form tutor. Other things that I think are not necessarily like you have to do, but they're really helpful is things like knowing when their birthdays are, knowing their hobbies, get them to fill in documentation, give them a form to fill in, like a questionnaire, asking them about themselves and a little bit of background. So these are all little tips and tricks that you can do. Meet and greet them each day, phone home for at least one each week with positive comments. Those are the sort of things that make a real difference. Particularly if you know that students, get into a lot of trouble around school, try and pick up on the positive of them so they still get a positive experience. And it's not about being soft with them. You can still be strict with them. You can still deal with them for issues and talk to them about those issues. But if they know that you're an advocate for them, you've got their back. Even if they do something wrong, you can still be someone there for them to talk to, that they can go to for help and support, so that they're not on their own. But the main key message to take away from the role of the form tutor is really being consistent and knowing those students. It's something I think we'll come back to and talk more again in the future. I'm sure if we can get some other people on to talk about it. But as I said, I wanted to keep this really down to 15 minutes. So we've just hit that 15-minute point. Hopefully that was useful, and I'll see you all in the next one.